Hello, everyone. Welcome to August 26th episode of Now, Next, Later. Sasha, it's good to have you back with us this week. How was Western Secondary?
Western was great. I would have joined from the golf course, but it would have been probably both spotty in my reception and also in my playing. So thanks for managing with me being out.
We'll work up to the live from the golf course version of Now, Next, Later at some point. We're not there yet, so it's
I'm
totally
not
cool.
I'm not at the like KP live, stage
Yeah,
yet.
exactly. He's leading the way on live handheld video for sure. And today we have Jodi Hall with us. Jodi, thanks for joining us. It's good to have you on
Yes,
Now, Next, Later.
absolutely. Thank you for having me. My now next later on the golf course would be now tee off, then an iron shot, better call the drink cart. Next, you better call the drink cart. And later, you better call the drink cart.
There you go. Excellent. I like that. That's one of the things that makes golf fun is uh you can be at least as far as the charity tournaments especially, you can be as good as you want to be. It's like
Yeah. Well,
we're not out here to impress anyone. Let's just have
yeah,
some
the
fun.
charity ones, when you're scrambling too, there's usually beverages at the
Yeah.
tees. So it's like, my golf game is like dancing. The more I drink, the better I get.
Mine is very directly proportionate. So yeah, just I have an issue, as most golfers do, with getting in my head, and alcohol removes that issue. So for
It's
better
very
or
much a
worse.
mental game, that's for sure. So's dancing, actually. Yeah.
Yeah.
They're both mental games. Well, thank you. This is going to be a fun episode because one of the themes that we've actually been building to, Jodi, is your expertise. So this is going to be fun to ask you some questions. We've found ourselves almost whichever guest we're talking about, whatever's going on in the news, we keep coming back to adoption, and we keep coming back to specifically adoption when you're working with another company, whether it's a startup, an existing vendor, whether you're making a switch from a known vendor to a known vendor, uh, and in particular, thinking about it from inside and outside the company. Because a lot of times you get a senior leader who wants there to be adoption, but maybe doesn't have the plan for how this is actually going to work post closing with that technology company or vendor. And so we were kind of chatting over email before this, where I said, like, we're trying not to talk about adoption every single week, but there's different flavors of it, especially with our different guests, that just keep coming up.
Yeah.
So I thought maybe with that background, and as usual, I always tell the audience, please put questions in the chat, because we do try to monitor the chat, and we will pose those questions. Obviously, we have our own. But in the structure of Now, Next, Later, one thing I wanted to ask you just to kick us off is, what are you hearing from lenders about their appetite right now for something new? We're in this, last week I called it brackish waters between one rate environment and another rate environment. We're sort of watching them mix and trying to decide. So you've got your ear to the ground with a lot of different lenders and technology providers. What's the now? What's the current state of affairs that you're hearing from lenders?
I think we're about to break over the wait and see.
Okay.
At least that's what my fear is. I keep saying for lenders, like, you're going to come to me when you're in the trenches and you're having needed to already have been implementing technology to handle the volume, because you're telling me that you do not want to just add bodies to the process and go through this expand and contract that the market has seen, but at the same time you're wait and see to see what others do, or what technology is out there that can help you. And then some are going to wait too long, in which they are going to have extended turn times, and then they're going to be like, all right, I need this now. And then they're going to be in a backlog of others who I need this now, that are trying to get implemented. I do want to talk for a second about the adoption question from the eyes of a tech provider.
Mm-hmm.
And I and hopefully this will be a little bit different spin than you have talked about on previous shows, but for technology startup companies, the first thing that they have to do is they have to listen first. Almost every tech startup, they create a problem. It might be somewhat related to what lenders are seeing as a problem, but oftentimes they have two sales hurdles to overcome. First, they have to sell the lender that they have the problem, and then they have to sell that their solution is what they need to overcome the problem. So the implementation piece needs to start far in advance before you start putting fingers to the keyboard and doing development, and making sure that you're actually going to solve an end problem for the lender, as opposed to create additional problems that might not be at the forefront. The other piece is not trying to do everything and being very focused. But I believe, because so much lenders want to have a solution that is more broad than just a singular piece. But tech companies need to come forward with what their piece is, and then they need to work with other partners as they continue to build out. So they need to be almost who they see as their competition. They need to think about having strategic partnerships of working with to create a greater value proposition, and bringing out an entire ecosystem to a lender and hand it to them. And that will help with their adoption and implementation process.
Yeah, you've hit on something that I struggle with as I try to map the lay of the land and really understand what is going to change the consumer experience, change the cost curve. I was in a lot of conversations last week where we were talking about how you go to a conference, and I'm confident this will be the same at annual. You walk around the exhibit floor, and if not every single one, 90% of the banners talk about cutting costs, lowering costs, being more efficient. And yet we know in the data that has never happened. So the costs only continue to rise according to the mortgage bankers data. So one of the questions that I have is this question of singular solution, point solution that you just described, versus looking at it more holistically. And there's always been a tension where if you want something done as a startup, all your investors are telling you, like, start with that one little thing and do that well. But that point solution, either you never expand beyond it, or lender has purchased 3 other solutions after you that you actually do or were on your roadmap, and they went and bought them anyway in this sort of transactional mindset. Have you figured out a solution to talking to both sides of that moment where it's like, well, a point solution is the only thing I can get in the market, but it would benefit everyone if we thought more holistically, because that's actually where efficiency would come from. And yet here we are. What do you see in that?
Well, on both sides of that equation, for lenders, a lot of lenders have tech stacks that do things that they need solutions for that they don't know that they do.
Right.
So it does take having, digging deep into your existing vendors and what their roadmap has been and what they have brought, because sometimes to the detriment of those tech companies, their account managers have not done a good job of staying engaged with the client and letting them know what solutions they have. So I'm always for, if you already have the solution, then you find out that you have it. You might have to do some digging to know that you have it so that you aren't implementing new technology. But you also have to look at, well, what could that existing technology do better, or what is new out there that is going to run past what we currently have. And also on that same note, and what I have had success in recently is bringing tech vendors together so that you are a singular piece. You don't have, I saw on LinkedIn, you were talking like no one wants to be first, right? Like everybody wants to be second.
Yeah.
But you maybe you use someone who is already there and leverage
Mhm.
that as a vehicle in a partnership to deliver your solution. So what I've had success with a particular lender currently is bringing solutions together. So even though it's pieces, so it's point of sale, it's CRM, it's employment verification, it is tax transcript verification, taking all the pieces, but actually getting them to work together so that small and mid-sized lenders, or even the large lenders who are buy versus build, have the ability to take advantage of those solutions together without having to put a ton of resource dollars into the development and the integration and the linking all of the pieces together.
Mhm.
Jeremy, there's a couple things I want to come back to that you mentioned, and then something, Jodi, you just mentioned that I think is an opportunity. One, you talked about, we say that there is technology that can reduce costs, but the cost of a loan continues to go up regardless, right? And I think that's true. However, I think a lot of the reasons why the cost of a loan being produced going up, it isn't always technology. It has been in certain instances. We know our dear credit bureau friends have not been super friendly in that space. But there's also just general overhead. Like I think sales is often the heaviest lift in that, right? And we all know that the cost of doing business has gone up in general. And so I think there are solutions out there technology wise that have brought down the cost, but we're dealing with other costs rising right at the same time. So you're kind of like in this game of like, well, some technology is actually automating and making things better and more efficient and potentially saving us money. But unfortunately, other technology costs are going up, or maybe my staffing costs are going up. And so I'm playing this game of like, how do I, really beat that out? And then, of course, in a market like this, where it's just hard to be profitable. So I think that's something to consider. Is it doesn't mean that technology isn't working or isn't lowering costs. It's just we're competing against other things that are going against that. And then Jodi, something you brought up that I think, having played on now both a little bit of the lender side, but mostly in the mortgage tech space, that lenders don't always realize they have the ability to do this. And I'm really hoping from this podcast, they get this message loud and clear. You can push on your vendors. Please push on your vendors to play nicer together. If what you want is a certain, VOI, VOE, and you need the POS to be integrated in a way that makes that easier for you, tell that POS provider, sorry, like I'm not going to move forward unless you make this work. I don't want to use your solution. I don't want to go down that path. Or I have a POS and you have a closing solution and I don't want to use your closing solution. I want to use someone else's closing solution. I think vendors have far more power than lenders have far more power than they give themselves credit for, to push on the vendors for us to do a better job of ensuring that you're getting a life cycle experience that is positive, not just for you and your company, but also for your borrowers. And it's just something I don't see leveraged enough. And certainly the bigger you are as a lender, sure, the more sway you have. So then great, if you're a bigger lender, do it. And if you're not, then find a few smaller, medium-sized lenders and band together and do it together.
Absolutely. And we have seen a change in the cost to originate. We actually have a little bit of profit in Q2, a little bit of profit per funded loan through the MBA's IMB net revenue statistics. And is that because we are seeing some lenders adopt technology? Is it because they have spent time making their workflow more efficient? I think that will, if we continue to see the costs go down, well, and volume solves everything, right? We start cranking a bunch of streamlined refinances through platforms, we should start to see revenue, and the volume will help. But I also do think that some people have spent time, and we do see a cost reduction in verification services that we had been looking for through companies like Truve and Halcyon, and with them coming to fruition, and as they gain adoption, we'll also see those origination costs go down.
Yeah, I think that's a good point because, I tend to forget, even though it was like part of my experience, I tend to forget that maybe like the Rockets of the world, don't announce how much money they've actually saved and don't submit that data to the MBA. So it is actually that large digital lenders that you're referring to, and Sasha, that you implied, like there is savings going on. It doesn't get attention because there may be certain lenders or even types of lenders that don't want that to get attention. It is their differentiator. It is the thing that kind of like manages their war chest for the leaner times. So it's like, why would I tell everyone my solution? So I think you're right that it's really this problem of kind of the mid-market IMB that keeps getting squeezed without that benefit, and they're kind of getting it from both sides, to your point, Sasha. Not large enough to command as much leverage, and yet not able to move as quickly. So I think that's a good reminder. Do you have a sense, Jodi, of what that lender, the lender that's going to reach out to you in a couple of weeks screaming about help, do you have a sense of where that biggest pain point's going to be yet? Like you mentioned verifications, so that's a really good example, but I wasn't sure if that's the example or if you had others. What do you think is going to be the area?
It's going to be set up. It's going to be set up because you're going to get a backlog from your applications. And if all of your setup and order outs, if you have no automation in that space, you're going to get a backlog there. You're going to get a backlog in underwriting. We saw when interest rates go down, applications go up. We also have a lot less underwriters underwriting today. So there's going to be outreach for automated underwriting. And then the one we all forget about is post-closing, because as you start to deliver loans and are getting those, people are like, we'll power through post-closing. So that we'll start to see extended dwell times on warehouse lines because of lack of technology, lack of workflow automation, and being able to handle the post-close conditions as they're coming back from the aggregators. And we'll see more because there'll be more volume going through. There will be more conditions. The loan officers are going to be screaming because we're reaching back out to the borrowers, creating a poor borrower experience because we didn't get everything that we needed to in the loan manufacturing process. So I think those are three big areas of concern.
I would double down on all those, and the post-close one. I think people have been able to negotiate great warehouse line right now, but just like everyone else, as the market comes back, they're going to come back and renegotiate too. And I think that, to your point, that dwell time could become more and more costly, and an area where people can easily focus on right now to be in a better place, to have an ability to throttle up or back as you need to, if they're willing to invest the time and money to get that in place.
Yeah, you and I have spent a bunch of time trying to explain to lenders that if you have a digital closing solution, that actually is where you pick up the post-closing delivery efficiency. And you can't think about it as just a consumer experience or just a Ron closing room. You have to think about it way more holistically, because in these moments, if you know where all that data is and you have it digitally, it becomes a lot easier to at least avoid that backup that we've seen in the past.
Yeah. And if we see a post-closing, like your expected versus your actual and what your extension fees are, you see those for those who monitor it, which you should be, because it's a huge opportunity for improvement. But if you're, you're losing tens of thousands of dollars a month in suspense fees when volume is high. And so you need to be looking at that number and looking how you can drive it down. And it usually starts at the point of sale and the quality of the loan application and the quality of the underwrite. And then closing is another level that needs to be cleaned through that process, and even getting the right documents back and accurately back to keep those costs down. So it's not just the employee cost, it is the extension costs.
Yeah.
Jeremy,
Yeah.
sorry.
Yeah, please.
No, see, on the post-closing side, and I'm just curious because we were talking about it and I experienced this firsthand. So when working with a lender on a closing solution, what I would often hear from the team that ran post-closing was, I love that you have the solution, but like, is there anyone out there that is creating technology? And this is my question for you. Do you know of any emerging tech coming out that helps me better manage post-close workflow and the curative process? Because yeah, it's all great if, you know, it goes through as an e-closing and an e-note goes through and we save all this money on dwell time. But what happens when something's wrong with the loan and it comes back to me in 5 different formats to 5 different people and they're all working on it at the same time and I don't know they're working on it at the same time and I've got all this chaos to manage.
Yep.
And it's almost like that department feels like the redheaded stepchild that's been left all alone and they're like, can someone please create technology to solve this problem for me? So I have not been aware of any, but are you aware of emerging technologies and companies that are starting to focus in that area?
Not so much as being able to handle that. I have only been able to build it from being able to use OCR technology to bring in the post-closing conditions or even your QC findings so that it's coming in a similar format. So you know what your category of finding is, what your subcategory of finding is or suspense item so that you can then train to that, or you can set up processes further forward in the process to prevent them from happening. But so I don't know of a company that is doing that. So I hope that they reach out if there is one out there listening, or maybe you just started the vision of the next tech startup who wants to partner with companies who are doing like post-close delivery. You know, there are companies out there besides like the Investor Connect by ICE, but there are companies who set up that delivery of loan documents. But if you don't have your quality right in the front and you don't have that resource, you need to get your quality right in the front and maybe even add a quality assurance check before delivery, because you do have 7 days and most of the agreements to deliver. So if you're not going to put a automated underwrite with having rep and warrant relief or having some type of insurance policy for that, then maybe considering put a quality assurance check before you deliver that loan to help keep your costs down. Or Sasha, you just launched a new tech startup and solve that for the industry. That would be great. OptiFunder does a lot in the post-closing world, and but they don't do that. I've reached out and asked them that question and have said, hey, what if? So this is a little challenge for OptiFunder. Like, we need the solution in the space.
I've been pushing on them for best deck, so they're probably heads down focused on how to manage that one first. But we'll just keep picking on them until they do it all.
This would be a great place for be singular and focus for a tech startup that can plug into those options or plug into LOSs to be able to help solve that.
Well, and like you said, it's a great example of the dilemma we've been highlighting, which is if I use a fully digital point of sale through origination process, it becomes a lot easier to verify that data later if there's a question or discrepancy, but I got to keep it consistent all the way through. I can't be shifting it around different solutions, because by the time it gets to post-closing verification, it's like, well, which version am I verifying? Which, this one, or this one? And you know, we have a lot of people jumping in. Like I work with a company, for example, that is looking at how to do sort of rep and warrant from the investor on self-employed data and bank statement data. And that way it stays in one system. But in classic mortgage fashion, that's a point solution. That's just for income, just for a certain type of income. And now it's a source of truth for income. Yeah. And there's so many other pieces to your point that Sasha's making. So I really like this idea of like, well, we got to set it up front. We have to have it consistent, and then we could deliver. So I think there's some loan delivery systems that are pretty good. Like a Loramac. I'm sure like, you know, others would have something to say. Poly might have something to say about it. I don't know them well. But my point is, you have to give them your data first. It's like, I just did all this. Now I got to put it in another system to verify it and deliver it. So this is a great example of just like how hard it is to solve that problem.
And why everyone needs to work together, work together to solve industry problems.
So unless there's a VC watching who's going to fund Sasha as a founder, we didn't
funding. I know how you guys work.
We didn't solve it, but we at least got a really nice highlight there. We have a few minutes left, Jodi, and so I kind of wanted to jump to like we have 1 foot in next as we're thinking about predicting where this pain's going to happen. But I wanted to ask you a question that'll kind of lead us to the end here, which is, does the work pause when these streamline refis or easy refis come in? And because I've been trying to figure out what happens next. Lenders are trying to do certain things. They have a couple of things in flight that they're either piloting or they know they should do. Maybe they're not all the way through the roadmap or not all the way through different, and then this volume comes. And then the pain points you just described hit. Do you know the answer? And maybe it's different everywhere, but overall, like, do you see that the good work that was going on stops and then is picked up again in the new year? Or is it that there is a way, and if there is, how would you solve it? If you were telling a lender, here's how you keep going with the good work while we help you solve this influx of volume. What are we to do? I guess is my question.
Yeah. So in past experience, the work stops with the volume. But that is also, living through 2020, 2021 volumes. And oftentimes, depending on the size lender, they don't have dedicated teams to work on implementation and workflow. It is your department managers that are doing that. So it's either they're working two jobs and trying to do both, or the work does pause. And the only way to circumvent that for small and mid-sized lenders is to get help. If you want to keep pushing that forward, then you have to get help from the outside, someone who isn't buried in the weeds. All three of us that are, especially Sasha and I, that's work that we do with lenders. But you need help driving your roadmap, driving your projects, where you're not involved in the weeds on a daily basis. The other piece is we need to be better as mortgage technology needs to be better at being so intuitive that you do not have downtime or you decrease the amount of implementation time. I do not believe that a point of sale should have to have training. It should be so easy
Well said.
and intuitive that there isn't training, that you literally should just be able to take what's plugged in behind your apply now and just be redirected and keep right on moving. So it's also a challenge to technology companies to make yourself so easy to implement that your work doesn't have to be on pause in high volume times.
Absolutely. I appreciate that. I think one of the biggest questions is how can I get help? And I love the get help example, because I think that's, from my experience, the only way it's going to continue. But I think the end result that we're trying to push for, at least what I've heard today, is it's worth it. If you do it, it will be worth it. And I think that's one of the things that has haunted IMB leaders in the past. Like, they don't trust that it'll be worth it, so they just stop it to get as much money as they can in the moment. And then we find ourselves 10 years later with very incremental gains instead of really true growth in many cases, in many businesses.
One of my lenders tells me, you've fallen and bumped your chin, so we just need to learn from everything that you bumped your chin on. I'm like, listen, I have gone skidding down a paved road 100 miles an hour. It's more than just a bump on the chin. So yeah, there's some lessons learned along the way. What were you saying, Sasha? Sorry.
No, I was just going to say, I don't have the data. I'm sure it has to exist out there. And if it doesn't, then yet another battle cry. But I do believe that lenders end up paying double, if not more, when they wait. Because when time gets crazy, volume goes up, and it is harder to now have 10 balls in the air and manage multiple implementations for technology. You are going to expend more time, more energy, more resources, obviously more money as a part of that. And so I've seen it in enough cycles now to know that, if you can find a way to invest in it now, even if you have to be, choiceful and say, hey, I'm only going to do it with one or two technologies instead of 10, fine. But pick the one or two where you feel like you're going to have the most impact, and get it done as quickly as possible. Because I do think when things get crazy again, we are going to get those phone calls. And unfortunately, it's not only going to be mad mayhem for all of us, although I'm not complaining, it's a paycheck. But it means that you will end up ultimately, I think, paying more over time. And that's, it's wasteful. And I think there's a better way.
Absolutely.
Well, Jodi, thank you. I have one last question that I sort of want to take the bait a little bit on something you referenced a minute ago, and then we'll let you go. But thank you again for being here. And my later question, just to end on kind of like really optimistic, forward looking, we kind of joked that Sasha identified post-closing as like a real need. Somebody should go work on that. Do you have one other or two other examples that come to mind where in your work, looking across the ecosystem and looking across these pipelines and all these different players, that there is an area out there that you've identified where you would say somebody should go work on that? Is there one or two of those, like what's next, or this thing that like, oh, I wish somebody was working on that problem right now and I haven't found anyone who is? Is there a one or two of those areas that pop to mind?
I can't think of anything that comes to mind other than there has been a large push and probably work that we're all doing to get a bigger chunk of the process in the point of sale. So, you know, whether it be point of sales that are CRM, point of sale, why not expand to LOS, or why not expand to product and pricing? Why not expand? And that doesn't necessarily mean that they need to go out and build it, but they need to seamlessly integrate with a number of vendors to put that very early in the process. You know, underwritten pre-quals, like Candor does an underwritten pre-qual, then you don't have to, you're doing that in your point of sale so that you aren't spending time on those clients who may not come to fruition on your TBDs. Like a lot of lenders don't do underwritten TBDs because they don't want the cost to go. Well, then work with a point of sale that integrates with an underwriting solution that can do that in the point of sale automatically without having to involve your line underwriters. As one example, but I think getting everything forward in the system. And right now we want to wait until we have a solid client. So we're waiting until we have intent to proceed as volumes go up. And as we get costs down to those verification services, we'll start doing those also within the point of sale so that, and you have a stickier client. And so you're going to have a better conversion because you're doing that all up front. So I think there's a big push in that area. And it's just a matter of the systems that are out there working together or adding additional services.
That's a great final takeaway. I really appreciate that. Well, Sasha, any final questions before we go on to the rest of our week?
No, I think that was a great way to end it. Thank you so much for being here, Jodi.
Yep. Thank you for the invite. I look forward to what you all have going forward. Thank you for the work you're doing in the industry.
Thank you.
Likewise,
great to talk to you. Thanks,
you're
Sasha.
definitely one of our thought leaders and drivers in this industry. So thank you for everything you do too.
Thank you very much. Talk soon.
Have a great week, everyone.